group of researchers from around the world. What's probably going to happen is that you'll have some ideas that they should consider, and they'll have some ideas that you may not have considered. So here are, on the right-hand side, some macro opportunities and macro problems. This group of researchers recognizes that they don't have all of these figured out. They just picked up examples of their own. So again, macro problems, long-term, international, and interdisciplinary. And macro opportunities are conditions that are allowing us to achieve unprecedented success. They're color-coded, so if they're blue on the right-hand side, they're a macro problem. If they're yellow, they're a macro opportunity. And you'll notice that a few of them are both blue and yellow, which means that they're both a problem and an opportunity. So exponential knowledge growth is a problem because how are we going to handle it all and figure out what knowledge is worth using and what isn't? But the fact that we have all that knowledge obviously is an opportunity. So I'm going to skip ahead a few slides here and get into a few examples of macro problems and macro opportunities. Here is one of our biggest macro opportunities. I'll just let you read that. So Scott Page pulled together the research in this. He's a complexity theorist economist who was interested in the research on group problem solving in organizations, in business, industry, education, non-governmental organizations, and anywhere that groups of people got together to work on complex problems, and conclusively showed that diverse teams, those that incorporate diverse theories, philosophical perspectives, cultural backgrounds, will outperform those that are uniform and homogeneous, even if the homogeneous team is more intelligent in terms of IQ. So if you took 5 Nobel Prize winning economists and put them in a room over there, and 5 of us and put us in this room, and gave both groups the same highly complex problem to deal with. If it didn't just deal with economics, it could have some economics in it. We would consistently outperform them because they come from the same background, idea framework, research base, things like that. That's assuming that we're not as smart as they are. I don't necessarily believe that, but let's pretend we're not as smart as they are. We'd still outperform them. Here's another macro opportunity. Just let you read that too. So this kind of goes along with cognitive diversity. This is a physicist who did most of the work on this, revealing that scientific networking now has become so vibrant that it's enabling scientists to solve problems they couldn't before. One example of that was the Polymath project, in which a leading mathematician, the top mathematicians in the world win the Fields Medal. It's like the Nobel Prize of mathematics. A Fields Medal winning mathematician was trying to solve a math problem that nobody had ever been able to crack before. And he made a few little dents in it and was getting frustrated. So he thought, why don't I post what I've accomplished so far online and ask for help? Maybe something will happen. And nothing happened for a few days, and then ideas started to trickle in. And then they started to pour in. And within a few weeks, a group of people who had never interacted before from around the world had solved this math problem that a genius mathematician couldn't solve. And it turns out that each of these individuals who is contributing online had a little piece of the puzzle, and they weren't all great mathematicians. Some of them were strong mathematicians, Others were high school math teachers in New Zealand, people who had little pieces of math expertise. And some of the other things on here, the Galaxy Zoo, this is an online system in which astronomers decided to solicit the help of ordinary people. So they realized that their powerful telescopes were giving them too much information. They couldn't possibly deal with all of it. So they invited people to look at all of their new data and try to identify patterns. They're ordinary people now are discovering new types of galaxies because of this project. They're inventing new medical systems as well, for medical treatments out of this. The metaphor here is a landscape where the vertical dimension again is success, and notice that you've got this orange arrow is a dogmatic individual, somebody who's narrow-minded, or a small group of dogmatic individuals. And they kind of wander around blindly and fall into a dogmatic sinkhole, which is a lack of success. The blue arrow is a group of highly creative and intelligent individuals, but they're also isolated from others. So they make some success. They end up on top of a mediocre solution mesa. They achieve this success, but they can't reach the top level. All of those green dots are these small clusters of individuals from around the world that are contributing ideas to a project they're being worked on. And their ideas are coalescing and they're climbing up to optimal solution pinnacle. So that's something we couldn't do before because we didn't have electronic networking. Here are some more obvious ones. The race for what's left, just let you read that. So you've probably, yes?
I'm sorry, I had a question kind of about the last slide.
Sure.
Has there been any findings that there is a limit to the productivity of collaboration? And by a limit, I mean like, can there be too many people trying to collaborate? And is there like an optimal number or like diversity that solve these problems?
That's a real good question that hasn't really been settled yet. It's been settled in creativity research where psychologists get groups of people together and they say that a group that's more than 5 or 6 is usually less effective than one that's a bit smaller. But this is a new game in town, this idea of electronic networking where people just submit ideas. And so it's messy and it's really hard to get a handle on how it's working. But for some reason, it's really working well right now anyway.
One of my favorite things aside from fables are like adages and sayings. And so our culture is filled with these sayings that sort of are embodiments of either truths or platitudes, etc. And one of them, too many cooks spoil the broth. So the idea that in any enterprise, if you get too many people trying to do it, it's going to mess it up. So that's an idea that is, sort of pervades our culture. But this electronic networking really does change things. And then there's the question of like, how are they vetted? So this mathematician who is getting input from many, many people, that person's probably in a position to basically say, okay, that's an idea, but we're rejecting that one. That's an idea that has some potential. So some kind of vetting process, and maybe even if it's an automatic sort of digital vetting process, like when multiple people are saying the same things, and okay, let's pay attention to that one. When this is an outlier that basically seems to be going nowhere, maybe that's the one it doesn't get listened to. And I think the electronic networking is so changing the way things can be shared. Some of our adages that come from way back when may no longer have the sort of cogency that they once did.
Good point. Back to the race for what's left. You may have seen in the news that China is building little islands in the South China Sea and then putting air bases on them, things like that. Reason for that is that the South China Sea is resource rich, and this race for what's left makes it more valuable. So countries in Southeast Asia and East Asia are beginning to saber rattle over that region. Same thing, according to Claire, same thing is beginning to happen in the Arctic region. Countries that border on the Arctic are gaining pressure to conflict with each other. That includes the USA, Russia, Denmark, Norway, and Canada. So at some point when this happens, I'm from Canada, so you guys might have to kick me out if Canada conflicts too much with the USA over those resources. One little piece of evidence of the seriousness of this, Claire said that a Russian submarine went under the Arctic ice sheet and dropped a small platinum Russian flag on the North Pole as a symbol. And here's another macro problem. You know about this one, you know a lot about this one already. There have been researchers now making the case that the Syrian refugee crisis is not just political, it's also environmental. Because climate change turned that region of the world into having a long-term drought. So that people in Syria who would have been able to put up with all of this violence and oppression, there's just too much and they have to get out now. So they're saying that these environmental refugee crises are going to multiply in the years to come. Like this one is going to look small compared to those. This is both a problem and an opportunity. The idea of democratic growth and erosion. Democracies are not carved in stone. Once you have one, it doesn't mean you're going to have it forever. It can erode and disappear and turn into totalitarianism. Simultaneously, democracy can build in other parts of the world. So you build, there's too much complexity in this to go through it in detail, but you build by going up through the middle, finding compromises. You end up eroding democracy by going too far down this side or too far down that side. Right-wing extremism on this side, left-wing extremism on this side. So you will find Pinochet's Chile down at 5:30 p.m. and Hitler's Nazi Germany down in the same region. Over here you would find Soviet Russia and Pol Pot regime in Cambodia. So that is both a big opportunity. There are more democracies now in the world than there ever have been before. But the Western world has democracies that are beginning to erode. Inequality, I think I heard one group talking about inequality and poverty. We won't look at this in detail, but because we'll look at it in more depth next week or 1 week after that. But essentially, the more poverty and inequality there is in the world, the more severe the macro problem is. And we have more now than we used to have within nations, but it's also disappearing in some ways too. This one we'll look at in more detail later also, the idea of dogmatism, that humans get really dogmatic about, or narrow-minded and short-sighted about what they think and believe. So let's go back and have a look at this thing. This is a model of talent development. And creativity researchers have contributed ideas to this. The basic idea here is that when you're a little kid, you discover an aspiration. An aspiration is a goal that you want to achieve. Like your first aspiration might be, I want to be a cowboy or princess, right? And that changes tomorrow. But can you think of any aspirations you had? Did you have any long-range goals when you were a kid? Anybody want to tell us a story about that? Or at least tell us what the aspiration might have been?
I wanted to be a rock star.
Okay.
It's kind of funny. I wanted to be an oncologist when I was a kid, and now I want to be a musician. So I've kind of gone less realistic as the time has gone on.
How did you know about the existence of oncologists when you were a kid?
I have 3 sets of grandparents, and 2 of them had histories with cancer, and so I wanted to stop that from happening to someone else.
Mm.
Yes, I gave
I'm
up.
also in the rock star camp as well.
Okay. Anybody else have an aspiration from childhood? Yeah.
I don't know if I would say it was long term, but it ends up being long term. We used to have like spelling groups in elementary school, and there were different levels of spelling groups, and I was always in the bottom levels for spelling groups. So in elementary school, a big thing for me, because it was like embarrassing. It's weird how that works. A big thing was being in the top spelling group, and so then I started working into that, and now I have like really anal things about spelling and grammar and stuff like that. So it's like sort of a long-term thing.
So you turned into a strength then?
Yeah, you sort of.
Yeah. That tends to happen there. Some people have failures, and then they become so charged up to turn those into successes that they eventually become better at the thing that they failed in than anybody else. This model, you discover an aspiration, you want to become something, and then you discover a talent that fits the aspiration. So if you want to be a mathematician, then you discover that you have mathematical calculation ability, then that feeds back into the aspiration. Or you want to be a musician and you discover you have musical talent, that strengthens the aspiration. And then you become more inspired to become successful in that area, which means you devote more time to developing the talent, which makes you better. It feeds back into the aspiration, makes it stronger. It becomes a virtuous spiral of growth upward toward self-fulfillment. And the philosophers who talk about self-fulfillment haven't really defined it very well. The best they can say about it is, if at this point in your life you can look back and say, so far my life has been well lived, then you can say you're self-fulfilled. Somebody had a question or comment? Yes.
Does the original aspiration play into talents and capacities? Like, if you want to be a mathematician, and I don't know why young people want it. Never mind. If you want to be a rock star, does that aspiration, that desire, have any effect on the development of talents and capacities at the first stage, not afterwards? Is that shown? I mean, I guess with things like music, it's hard because that's the whole, there's a whole argument about just being born with the right instrument, blah, blah, blah. But is there anything?
Yeah, these two things have to work together. So if you have an aspiration, you might get the aspiration from, my aunt is really cool and I want to be what she is. And then you discover, I don't have any of the talents she does. And then you're just hitting your head against a brick wall trying to pursue that. So eventually you learn not to do that and you find something else you're good at. And then your aspirations and talents work together to build this spiral of growth.
Are you implying that talent could be from birth?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Most of the experts in creativity and giftedness research will tell you that it's both nature and nurture.
Okay.
And that you might have hidden talents you don't know about. For example, Ha-Joon Chang is a leading economist whose work reveals that there is more vibrant entrepreneurship in the third world countries than there is in the developed nations, which means that people are making something out of nothing.
So, and I kind of relate this to Maslow's hierarchy, but it's really kind of like the opposite model, because it's like the upside down pyramid, and self-fulfillment being relatable to self-actualization.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like this model could only work for people who had opportunities open to them to discover and pursue their talents. So is there a point where this doesn't work when people like aren't having their basic needs met and can't pursue their aspirations and talents?
Yeah, that's a really good insight. And that connects back to the inequality and poverty macro problem, that when you are impoverished, you just don't have the opportunities to discover what your talents are, what your aspirations are. We'll get into this more in a couple of weeks, but there are highly talented impoverished kids who do really impressive things, but they do them for illegal means because that's the only option to them. Like there are sociologists who've discovered that little kids in the ghettos of South America, like in Rio de Janeiro, who are living by themselves, they're less than 10 years old, and they're surviving by themselves on the street. Not only that, but they're being hunted by, like, businesses don't want them around, so they hire people to hunt them and kill them. These little kids are dodging killers and grubbing around trying to find food and so on. And the sociologists who studied them said that these little guys and girls, are thinking in highly sophisticated ways, in creative problem-solving ways that approximate the kinds of sophisticated thinking that Fortune 500 executives do. The difference is the Fortune 500 executive is padding his stock portfolio while the little kid is thinking about how can I survive from today to tomorrow. Now that's a real impressive talent development in really oppressive conditions. But the majority of kids who grow up in poverty are not going to be able to get this thing going. They're just going to go day-to-day survival. Yeah.
I might also argue that the implementation of technology into like lower class, let me say that sentence again. Now that technology is like a little bit more inexpensive and is available to some people of lower class, then I think it gives them a better outlet to express themselves or create these talents that they might not have been able to do before.
Yeah, that's a good point, that things are changing so fast now. There are game changers out there, and cheaper technology is one of them. A good point. Let me show you what these experts say are the talents that we need to thrive and survive in the 21st century and make that leap up to the crest of the wave to overcome that creative intelligence gap. I'll let you read those, and then let's carry on a group discussion where you are after that. There are a few terms in here that I'll have to explain because they're research terms. Contextual intelligence is a framework for thinking about intelligence developed by Robert Sternberg, who's the leading psychologist. And what he means by that is being smart about your context. So if you are contextually intelligent and let's say you start a new job, you have to adapt to the new job to the extent possible. You have to change the way you think and do things to fit in. But you also, if you're contextually intelligent, will force that new context to adapt to you by negotiating some things that you want in the workplace environment. And then if those two things don't work well enough, then you get out and find a new context that fits you better. That's what he means by that. Metacognition means being able to think about your own thinking. Reflection means being able to think about what happened today and what am I going to do tomorrow to make it better. So, any other questions about any of the terms in there? Yes.
Mode switching?
Mode switching is kind of what we looked at last week with visual metaphor as an example of mode switching, where you translate thinking from one modality into another. So one modality would be text, and then turning that into a drawing, or turning it into a musical composition, or going back the other way, taking a piece of art and turning it into a written story. That's a mode switch. Mode switching is shown to make you remember stuff better and make you more creative. So if you take a few minutes in pairs and groups and consider this list of skills, is there anything that should be on there that isn't? Is there anything on there that's impossible to do or that you'd like to revise? So let's do that in small groups.
That's a pretty comprehensive list.
Sure.
Think of anything